Hey, how's it going? My name is Jeff. Welcome to my cave of cool books. Some of you are new to this channel. Thank you. Welcome aboard. Appreciate anyone who's recently subscribed or has subscribed in the past. Good to see you here. This is my February monthly reading wrap-up. I do these every month where I talk about books that I've read in the past month, as you would guess from the title. And this month was a pretty good reading month. Maybe not quite as many books read as or as much gotten through as in January, but not a bad reading month at all. Some of the things that I will mention here, I've already done dedicated videos for, review videos or whatever, and I will mention those in passing and also give a link below in the description. So first off, I started the month with a mystery. I read the fourth book in the Brother Cadfael series by Ellis Peters. Her real name was Edith Pargeter, and she also published some books under that name, but her name as a mystery writer she used was Ellis Peters, and she wrote, I believe, 20 Brother Cadfael books. These are historical medieval mysteries centering around a monastery and the Brother Cadfael main character. I believe they're set in the 12th century, the 1100s, and during a very turbulent time in England with some battles, kind of back and forth intrigues going on between who's going to, contestation over the rule of England. And this one, the fourth one, is St. Peter's Fair. And I thought it was pretty great. It was a lot of fun. Now, the Cadfael mysteries are part mystery, really. They're mostly mysteries, but there's elements of adventure, historical adventure, and of course, history in general. Now, Brother Cadfael is a really cool character. He was a military man. He had experience in the Crusades, and he was a soldier, and then he got done with a life of violence and traveling around the world, and decided to settle down for a quiet life as a Benedictine monk in Shrewsbury Abbey. And Brother Cadfael is from Wales. That's the pronunciation of his name, Cadfael. There was a pretty well done, I don't believe it was BBC, probably ITV, British mystery TV series featuring adaptations of many of the Brother Cadfael novels and starring the excellent Shakespearean character actor Derek Jacobi as Brother Cadfael, and of course they pronounce his name Cadfael on that show. The central mystery here, again, Brother Cadfael, he kind of, because he's a worldly man, he's known the world before, he is always usually the head abbot's choice of the monastery to handle affairs involving, crime and things that impede upon the abbey from the outside world, even though his main duties lie in preparing various herbs and medicaments for people who are ailing that come to the abbey. In this particular novel, there is an annual fair, the St. Peter's Fair, a trade fair where many people, many merchants and guilds members come to line up their carts right in kind of the grounds between the abbey and the local town of Shrewsbury and sell their wares, and there's lots of food booths and partying, etc. going on. And basically what happens is older merchant is murdered, his clothes stripped off him, he's tossed in the river, he later turns up found in the river, and obviously some skullduggery is afoot. It soon proves to be the case that maybe this man had some information that certain parties are looking for in this kind of Cold War of a sorts between King Stephen and Empress Maud. There's a young man in prison accused of this murder. And so after that point, some other murders happen. There's a young woman who was the niece of the murdered merchant at the beginning of the book, who gets in grave danger, and there's a rush to rescue her and a thrilling kind of action-packed, fiery conclusion to the book. In the midst of all of this is Brother Cadfael, investigating using his little gray cells like Poirot. He's a very likable and shrewd character, and the history and period detail that's woven in here is just enough to really make the world come alive, the medieval world come alive, but it doesn't bog down the plot or suspense. I really enjoyed this novel, and if I had more I had this one on my Kindle. I had bought it in the past at some kind of special Amazon deal where I think I paid $1 or $2, probably very, very reasonable price. And now after reading this one, I was all ready to read a whole bunch more, which I do have some back home, but I don't have them here with me in any physical copies. And the ebooks are not cheap at the moment. They're not ridiculously overpriced, but they're not as cheap as I would like them to be. And usually when I do get an ebook, generally speaking, I try to get them at a lower price than you could get a physical book version of something. Anyway, once I get my hands on some more Cadfael novels, I will read them. This was very good. A pretty interesting mystery, excellent world building and detail, and interesting characters, and some good kind of action and suspense as well. So I highly recommend that one. That's St. Peter's Fair, published in 1981 by Ellis Peters, the fourth entry in her Brother Cadfael medieval mystery series. Next, I got back into I stayed on my Kindle. I stayed in the ebook form because these books that I'll talk about here, these Westerns by Marshal Grover, are really hard to find in paperback, unfortunately. Now, over the last several years, Leonard B. Mears, the real name of the man writing under Marshal Grover, sometimes also Marshall McCoy, he's become one of my favorite Western writers of Westerns. He wrote hundreds and hundreds of books. And this series, the Big Jim series, later called the Nevada Jim series for the few books that were published by Bantam in the States, but they're a little bit more of the straight up Western revenge kind of style book series. Big Jim is Jim Rand, and he's a sergeant in the cavalry, U.S. cavalry, and his younger brother has been murdered. His younger brother was a lieutenant and was in a card game, and some tin horn gambler who's known for doing such dastardly things when events don't go his way or go against him, shoots Jim's younger brother in the back and flees. And Jim leaves the military. He would like to go back. I think he enjoys his life as a soldier, but in the cavalry. But he's bound and determined to track down his younger brother's killer, and that becomes an arc over the first several books, apparently, where he thinks he's found the guy or tracked down the guy that's responsible, but it's not quite him, etc. And that's what happens in this one, essentially, without wishing to spoil anything, because it's pretty obvious as you go through that otherwise there would not be a series, right? So anyway, Big Jim is thus called because he's a big man, big, broad-shouldered guy, and quite a formidable figure, fast with the gun, resourceful, got a good brain on him, good with his fists, etc. But he has a run of bad luck. He uses some of his last money to, buy a good horse, buy some good guns, weapons, food, etc. But he is bit in the back by a rattlesnake out in the middle of the desert, and that's when he first makes the acquaintance of a Mexican kind of, this might be a slightly racist aspect of the book, but the way they present this character is very cool. So he kind of defies expectations, but he looks like a disheveled, dirty, tobacco-stained teeth, small, wiry, rodent-like Mexican guy named Benito. And Benito does save Jim's life. He gets the poison out of him and bandages him up. And then he sees that he's okay. He leaves him enough water, etc., to survive, and then takes off, leaves him his horse, and he doesn't strand him, but he does help himself to the rest of Big Jim's money is in his rifle, etc., in skedaddles. And Jim's now got another person he wants to get revenge on. He shows up in the nearest town, and he finds out that Benito is about to be strung up and hung by some angry Mexican townsfolk. Apparently, Benito had partied hard with Big Jim's stolen money, pawned the other goods to a local shopkeeper, and in a bit of drunken debauchery, had a tryst with the local man's daughter, and is refused her hand in marriage, and they're going to string him up for a scumbag. And of course, Big Jim goes off and, kind of without really knowing why, rescues, stops the hanging, rescues Benito. He still plans to put Benito in jail at the local sheriff's jail. And in the meantime, the local sheriff, his attractive daughter, and the storekeeper, and I think the local doctor, they're all eyeballing Big Jim, going, this might be the guy we need to break up this group of cattlemen and his crew of hard cases who are running roughshod over the territory and the town. And the sheriff has happened to have damaged, he's got a good reputation in town, and he's quite a formidable guy himself, but he kind of stupidly fell and damaged his gun hand. And he's hiding that from the bad guys so they don't take advantage of it, but they are in kind of desperate straits, so they try to recruit Big Jim to become a deputy temporarily, and they'll give him his guns back and whatever else of his material back. And they kind of manage to keep Jim around, and Jim's not too keen on the idea, but when the sheriff lets loose that there is a man resembling the character that the person that Jim is seeking, who shot his younger brother in the back and who might be related to this bad guy, Jim decides to stick around. And there's plenty of action, and much to Jim's surprise, Benito, the sly and sneaky Benito, proves really useful, sneaks into the enemy camp, gets some information, also comes to his aid despite Jim saying, stay away from me, I don't trust you, you greasy Mex, and stuff like that, little races back and forth there. But Benito is, despite being kind of a rascal, proves quite a useful and boon companion, and eventually they ride off together, Benito on his sorry-looking little burro. And apparently, at least for quite a while in the series, Benito and Jim are a double act, and that's all for the better, because Benito is a really fun character. Jim is a cool, tough hombre, kind of typical hero gunslinger guy, the strong, silent type, and he needs someone like a Benito, a sidekick, to kind of liven things up and keep the banter going. And that book proved a lot of fun. I don't think I'm going to like the series quite as much as the Larry and Stretch series, which are near and dear to my heart, or have become so. But I'm eager to read some more of these Big Jim books. I just really wish I could get my hands on some of the lovely Bantam editions, because they have amazing covers by James Bama. James Bama, most well known for painting many of the Doc Savage covers for Bantam books, but he really excelled at Western art, cowboy art, etc., and just amazing, almost photorealistic paintings. And he did some really great work on these covers for Bantam for the what they call the Nevada Jim series. I think they also changed the character's name from Jim Rand to Jim Gage. What's wrong with Jim Rand? I have no idea. But they did the same thing with, futzing around with Larry and Stretch's names from the original into, I think they called him Larry and Streak, and instead of Larry Valentine, Larry Vance, etc. I don't know why they made those stupid kind of cosmetic changes, but the main books are not changed. And again, Leonard B. Mears, Marshall Grover, just really comes up with all sorts of interesting and varied storylines for these Westerns. And they're a lot of fun. They're pretty short. They're probably about 100 to 130 pages each or so, 30 to 40,000 words. Short. They'd be probably classed as novellas these days, but they were definitely novels and paperbacks back in the day. That was a ton of fun. I'll read some more of Big Jim later in the coming months. Okay, after that, I finished All-Star Superman, which I talked about in a dedicated video, and I will link to that below. This is the DC Compact Comics version of this story, written by Grant Morrison with art by Frank Quitely. And I showed quite a bit of the art off in my dedicated video, and I know a lot of people here that watch this channel are not maybe big comic readers, or maybe they're not big Superman fans, but I really recommend this one. This one is kind of one-off, one and done story, 12 issues, 12 chapters, kind of chronicling the 12 labors of Superman, so to speak, as he is seemingly dying from an overdose of radiation from the sun engineered by his archenemy Lex Luthor. Really interesting and fun read. I enjoyed this and I recommend it a lot. For a more detailed review of this, please look at my earlier video that I published in the middle of the month or so. Next, I did a video about Walker British Mysteries, that line with their maroon or wine red spines and a back frame here. And this is The Baron in France by John Creasy. Now, John Creasy was a hugely prolific British writer of crime books mostly. He wrote many different series. He wrote a large chunk of the Baron series under the name Anthony Morton. That's why it says John Creasy as Anthony Morton. So this was originally published in 1960 in the UK, but this Walker Books edition was published in 1983. And, Creasy wrote so many books. He had so many series going at once. He's one of those people, one of those writers that just was churning them out, slamming that typewriter 24/7, apparently. Hundreds and hundreds of books he put out. And so he was publishing so many, he needed to use pseudonyms to, not overcrowd the market with his own name. But, after he passed away, people were aware of Creasy, especially his books were ubiquitous for a time there in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, etc. They used his real name instead of the pen name Anthony Morton. Now, I have mentioned a few times in the past, there was a TV series called The Baron that aired about the same time as The Saint in the early to mid 60s, starring Steve Forrest as the Baron. Now, that was a slightly different version of the character, more of a former Army commando, an American, not a British person like in the book series, who was a cattle baron turned antiques dealer who got involved with all sorts of scrapes and espionage yarns and ventures. And that series, and that's a really fun series, but the Baron book series is a little different. The Baron was a master jewel thief who went straight and opened up an antiques and jewelry shop. And unlike the Baron in the TV show, the Baron here has a wife. His wife's name is Lorna. And now he lives mostly a pretty settled life. But once in a while, he snaps back into that Baron persona. And there's some, parts of this book where his wife looks at him and goes, he's switched back to that, the man I hardly recognize, dangerous and ready for action. And this is quite a good thriller, actually. What happens is at the beginning, someone breaks into a house of a jeweler friend of the Baron. The Baron's real name is John Mannering. So this jeweler friend of Mannering named Bernard Dale wakes up, catches the thief in the middle of the act of stealing, and the thief shoots him and kills him. And then the thief books out the door. The young daughter kind of of the dead man of Bernard Dale, gets kind of a look at him, but is too shocked to recall anything, and that kind of angle doesn't really play into the story. But the problem is, as the way the thief and murderer has set up another man, an associate of Bernard Dale, who to look like he was guilty of the crime, and he is tried and sentenced to hang. It's a matter of no small importance to try to save this innocent man, and Mannering decides to investigate to try to spare him and track down the jewels and snare the real killer. Because even the police are not satisfied with their case, really. Something is niggling the back of their mind. Mannering has some friends among the police, of course, as many of these kind of characters do. Anyway, off to Paris we go, and Lorna Mannering is along for the ride, which does kind of cause some issues here, because Mannering takes her with him to Paris and on his kind of mission to break into this man who seems to have the jewels that were stolen, or may have them. Breaks into his house, his estate, and leaves Lorna outside waiting by the car. And Mannering goes through all manner, a pretty suspenseful section, goes through all manner of booby traps to get the jewels, comes out, and his wife's gone. Where's Lorna? And then he's eventually approached by a young Frenchman and his girlfriend, who say they've kidnapped her and they want the jewels returned. They're going to use them supposedly to help the poor or whatever. I don't know. It's a cat and mouse game from this point, and Mannering is he's losing time. Time is of essence to try to save this man's life, who was up for the chop, and also find his wife and get her back, and evade the police who are after him, because there was another woman involved who ends up with her throat cut in this mansion that was on the very same night that the Baron was breaking into this place, and all sorts of trouble ensues. And it's a pretty intense and really fun and fast-paced thriller. Creasy is a very solid writer. Nothing fancy, but very straightforward and well-written prose. You just kind of get absorbed right into the story. He's that kind of writer. She just gets right, slam, bam, bam, right down to facts, and with just enough local color and effective description to make things fairly, to keep the interest going and to make the events vivid enough. But you get lost in the story. Again, it's nothing, it's not spectacular or anything, but for a good, kind of meat and potatoes, action-packed thrill ride sort of crime novel, you can't go much wrong with John Creasy. After that, to come back to Leonard B. Mears or Marshall Grover, I read another in the Larry and Stretch series. As I mentioned before, there were hundreds of Larry and Stretch westerns, and each one has they're similar in that they have similar gun blazing action, but the various plots are quite inventive and they're very different. Each one, there's always something unusual going on, and this one is unusual because usually Larry and Stretch work together. They get in a scrape and they come out of it. The Texas Hellraisers, the Lone Star Hellions, the Texas Wildcats, they get a lot of kind of slang nicknames attached to them. There are a couple of really friendly, easygoing, and less pushed sort of cowpokes. And this is the 11th book in the series, Lone Star Valiant, and this is another ebook, again, very affordable, cheap ebook edition from Piccadilly Publishing. And this one, Stretch Emerson, is goes to the fore. Now, usually Larry Valentine and Stretch is the action man who is always ready to tangle. He's equally as adept as Larry at the physical stuff and the violence and riding, roping, gunslinging, etc. But Larry is generally the brains of the outfit. And the amiable Stretch is happy to leave the thinking to Larry. And they're both big, tall guys. Larry's, I think, supposed to be 6'2", and Stretch is supposed to be 6'5" or 6'6" or something. Larry's a little bit more, robust, and Stretch is more described as a beanpole quite often. But he is very formidable in a fist fight. Holds his own very well, and he has a couple of those in this book that are good fun. One good bar fight that's memorable where he demolishes 3 opponents pretty easily, pretty handily. But usually he's happy to amble along and right there with Larry, but Larry does the resourceful, quick thinking when they're in their various scrapes. But this time Larry is in the slammer for a crime he didn't commit, and he's been set up, and it's up to Stretch to figure out a way to find the real killers and get Larry out, with not break him out where he's going to be on the run, on the lam, a wanted man, because they're known for being, troublemakers in some ways for various lawmen around the American West, but they stay on the right side of the law. And they don't have a lot of time for lawmen, but they don't, they're on the straight and narrow. So Larry doesn't want to be broken out. Stretch knows he wouldn't want to be, although he's tempted to go in and get him. But instead, he has to play a lone hand and try to use his own brain materials, brain matter, to try to extricate Larry from his plight. And to do that, one of the things he ends up doing to stick around town, so kind of under disguise of a kind, is he gets himself involved in a traveling Wild West show, kind of like a Buffalo Bill Cody show, but a little bit more second run, not quite in the same high caliber. But because of his sharpshooting skills, he gets involved in trick shooting with a young lady that is one of the members of this traveling Western show. And there all sorts of antics ensue, full of action, full of intrigue, and full of narrow escapes and good humor, some funny bits here and there, especially at Stretch's expense, because much to his distaste, when he's performing in this Wild West show, he has to be dressed out in these really overdone, frilly, kind of showy cowboy duds, which unfortunately Larry sees and walks away grimacing, and I don't want to see that anymore of that, because they're real down-to-earth sort of cowpokes. They're not the fancy frilly type at all. So there's plenty of good action. This might not be the top tier of the various. I've only read probably about 8 or so of these Larry and Stretch Westerns out of the hundreds that Leonard B. Mears produced, but they've all been really good to varying degrees. This one I'd say is good, maybe in the middle of the pack. It was stands out a bit because of Stretch being mostly on his own for most of the book. Larry has a few parts here and there, mostly in the beginning and the end, but mostly it's Stretch on his own, and that's a novelty for this series. And it was really enjoyable. Again, really short read, probably 120 pages or so, and every chapter packed full of incident, humor, good dialogue, interesting characters. Maybe not quite as colorful supporting cast in this one as in some of the other books I've read in this series, but good, solid B+ Western adventure. I would recommend this series to anyone. Another video I did in February was a tour of my children's books, mostly my talking animal books, and I showed off several in that. It wasn't a very highly watched video, but that's okay. I didn't think that it would get a lot of views anyway, so I did get some nice responses though, and thank you for those who did leave a comment and watch. One of the books series I mentioned was the Rescuers series, the Miss Bianca series, written by Marjorie Sharp. And one of the books I didn't find, I neglected to track down for that video that I do have on my shelves, is this one, Miss Bianca in the Salt Mines. Now, I believe this was the 4th or 5th in this series. There's, I think, 9 Miss Bianca books. And again, this is, if anyone's seen the Disney Rescuers movies or the Rescuers Down Under, you'll know the central premise of the series. They're similar idea to the books, but the books are a little bit wittier and kind of more stylish and sophisticated. But I like the Disney movies too, don't get me wrong. Miss Bianca is a ermine white mouse, very elegant, delicate, ladylike mouse, and she is the chairwoman and perpetual Madam President, of the Mouse Prisoners Aid Society. And because they're small and can enter into these various prisons to get word out to try to help these prisoners, they try their best to do so. And in the previous books, Miss Bianca and her faithful, the secretary of the MPAS, Bernard, who adores the ground that just worships the ground that Miss Bianca walks on, basically. But he's usually much more practical, worried about what's going to happen, a reluctant hero, but he is a hero nonetheless, quite often, helping out in the rescue of these various prisoners. In this one, they're having lunch in Miss Bianca's pagoda one day, her and Bernard, and talking about how there's not a lot going on as far as rescuing goes, when Bernard finds a note in Miss Bianca's little salt cellar. Miss Bianca is quite a pampered pet mouse because she belongs to the son of the ambassador to, I guess, the United Nations. I think they're somewhere in Europe. I'm guessing perhaps Geneva or something. Perhaps it's France. Anyway, in Paris. But Miss Bianca they find the note, and the note is from Teddy, age 8, and he's being kept a prisoner in the salt mines. And how he got there is later detailed. But immediately, Miss Bianca feels terrible for this young boy who's in dire straits, really. He's being beaten and having a cold, miserable life. Kind of a captive slave almost to the warden of this salt mine prison. And it's hinted at the corruption that, whoever gets in this prison, the government doesn't really look too deeply into it because they need the people to work the salt mines. Their conditions are not great. Anyway, against kind of strong odds, Miss Bianca is determined to mount a rescue attempt of Teddy, age 8, as she calls him. And of course, if she's going, her admirer and staunch supporter, Bernard, is going to go. And but much to their chagrin, a couple of elderly professor types, wet blankets of a sort, are determined to go as well. And they have to take a train into the salt mine and find their way down into the salt mine, try to find Teddy amongst all the prisoners and try to get him out. And it's a really fun and witty book with lots of nice and sometimes very detailed illustrations by the great Garth Williams, who was the artist that did the art for most of the readers who are familiar with the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House books will certainly recognize his art. And of course, Miss Bianca of the bright eyes, and she's always has a positive aspect to things, and she's tries to think the best of people. And anyway, it's a really fun little amusing adventure. Fairly high stakes, I suppose, but told in a fast enough pace, but not overly intense fashion. But some plenty of action and humor, and frequent sophisticated language here and there. And Marjorie Sharp is writing for children, but these are written for obviously, in kind of maybe middle grade readers, I would say. Quite a few higher concepts and words that would be handled for little kids. So I would say good for kids who like kind of talking animal books. It's got kind of a Disney-fied cover that doesn't really fit the art inside. Pretty evocative illustrations. Anyway, fun little quick read, 128 pages of amusing hijinks and kind of elegant prose. So really enjoyed that. And finally, it was February was Holmes is Where the Heart Is. Holmes as in Sherlock Holmes. This is a reading event, I believe, created by Jim at Mystery and Mayhem. Great channel there, and many other excellent channels were co-hosting that event, and I'll put a link to their various channels down below. I wasn't a co-host or anything, but I wanted to do a little bit of Holmesian reading, and I did read some short stories that I will talk about in a moment. But the last full book I read, which was a collection of short stories, was His Last Bow by Arthur Conan Doyle. Out of this, I have I have several Holmes books, but not so many here with me. So many different editions of Sherlock Holmes, the original canon stories. And I have this Bantam Classics edition. This is Book 2, Volume 2, The Complete Novels and Stories, Volume 2. And this has in it, it has The Hound of the Baskervilles, The Valley of Fear, His Last Bow, and the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes. Now, I did read one of the Casebook stories, The Adventure of the Sussex Vampire, which is an excellent story. It was turned into not one of the better of the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes adaptations by Granada Television in the 80s and early 90s. That was a magnificent series. Jeremy Brett is the best ever screen Holmes as far as I'm concerned, and his two co-stars, David Burke and later Edward Hardwicke, were the best Watsons ever put on screen as far as I'm concerned as well. But this one was one of the kind of movie-length ones that the ITV did, that Granada did, and kind of expanded it to a 2-hour TV movie and kind of messed around a little bit with the story. They didn't change it in its broad outlines, but they added some things that weren't there in the original, and it isn't one of the more successful adaptations, which is not true of most of them. Most of them are excellent, but the story is great. The Sussex Vampire was really interesting. But his last bow has several good stories in it, and I read that whole book of stories. It was published separately as a collection in 1917. So it starts off with kind of a 2-part story called The Adventure of Wisteria Lodge. It has The Adventure of the Cardboard Box, which is quite a dark story, really. The Adventure of the Red Circle. The Adventure of the Bruce Partington Plans, which features Mycroft Holmes. Holmes's older and equally smart in a different way, equally clever brother, Mycroft Holmes, who's got his fingers in the web of government of Whitehall. The Adventure of the Dying Detective, which is another really good one. The Disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax. The Adventures of the Devil's Foot, which is one of my all-time favorite Holmes stories, and the Jeremy Brett version of that one is excellent. Highly recommend that. And finally, the book concludes with his last bow, which is actually kind of a flash forward to World War I, and Holmes is on an counter-espionage mission, and it's a really fun story where he's foiling the plans of kind of a undercover foreign agent working for the Germans, and has assembled a whole bunch of intel, which is dangerous to the British government and the country's safety, and Holmes has engineered a way, with Watson's help, to get that information and capture the spies. So that one's really fun capper. All the other ones are done kind of as reminiscences from back in the earlier Victorian and late Victorian period of Holmes and Watson's life. And like I mentioned, The Devil's Foot is a magnificent story. The Lady Frances Carfax one is also very good. The Dying Detective is one where Holmes is posing as on death's door because he's luring a fiendish mastermind who's come up with a nasty biological strain of that bacteria that he's already killed his nephew, and he's trying to kill Holmes. But of course, Holmes foils his plan and lures him in. So a lot of people during Jim's live stream rightly said these stories are comfort reads, and they are, and I think it's because of the friendship between logical-brained, cold to an extent, removed, emotionally detached Holmes, the genius crime solver and intellect, and the warmer, friendlier, stout and redoubtable assistant and pal Watson. And they do make a really good pair and are, wonderful characters. They've obviously lasted, 150 years almost or so. And they are outstanding characters, and, they kind of work best together. He kind of needs a Watson to humanize him, and there is an element of these stories, especially the Adventure of the Devil's Foot, where, Watson sees the true emotional regard that Holmes has for him in a rare moment where he lets the screen down a little bit. But despite that comfortable aspect, these stories can be really dark, quite nasty. Some of the crimes that Holmes and Watson deal with, and the criminals behind them can be really bleak and awful, really horrific things. Is one of the most famous Holmes stories. The Speckled Band is one of those for sure. And the cardboard box in this one is, it's involving quite a nasty case. A woman is sent a package with 2 severed ears, one belonging to a man and the other to a woman. The Devil's Foot, the central crime in Devil's Foot is really hideous, the way the results of what that happened, not in a gory sense, but certainly in, driving people mad and leading to the death of another woman. And, there's some really nasty pieces of work and nasty crimes in these books. And not all of them are set in London. They go out to the countryside and the environs surrounding the home counties there quite often. And Holmes has said in another, I forgot which story he says it in, but some more evil has been done in behind these isolated houses out in the countryside than in any part of the crime centers of London. I haven't read many Holmes stories in quite a while, so it was nice to have that event to kind of get me back to reading some, and I had no problem reading a bunch of them in a row. The Sussex Vampire from the Casebook. His Last Bow was the next to last collection of Holmes stories. The Casebook of Sherlock Holmes comes after that, and that's where the Sussex Vampire appeared. And there's all sorts of mostly lesser known stories perhaps in that, but there's some really good ones in there too. The Illustrious Client is one, and Shoshcombe Old Place, and The Creeping Man, and Problem of Thor Bridge, etc. Anyway, if you haven't, for some reason, read any Sherlock Holmes stories before, I highly recommend them. Doyle is a really good writer, very clear prose, and he comes up with quite a few clever. They're really adventures. The reason they keep saying the adventure of is there's a very strong adventure component to them, not just mystery component. And of course, they're highly influential on other mystery writers. Of course, Poirot and his dim bulb assistant Hastings by Agatha Christie is a very obvious nod to Doyle, although she puts many of her own fresh spins on the characters. But these House MD, with starring Hugh Laurie, that's obviously Holmes as a doctor, kind of influence there, crusty and curmudgeonly, and seemingly cold-hearted, stone-hearted character. So Holmes has fascinated people for many decades, and there's a reason why. They are well worth reading. Speaking of Holmes, I'm moving on to the short stories now. I already mentioned The Adventure of the Sussex Vampire from the Casebook, but I also read a couple of pastiche stories. That was one aspect of this this reading event. Holmes is Where the Heart Is. So I read a couple of stories out of here, Gaslight Arcanum. Now this was one of 3, I think, pastiche collections put out. This is edited by, it says J.R. Campbell. I imagine that they would want to say Ramsey Campbell if it was really Ramsey Campbell, so I'm assuming it's not. And by Charles Propolic, a noted Holmes scholar. Has illustration by Mike Mignola, Hellboy artist Mike Mignola. Dave Elsey does this rather creepy cover where he sees the cadaverous version of himself in the mirror. So Gaslight Arcanum, Uncanny Tales of Sherlock Holmes, as you can gather from that subtitle. These are stories where Sherlock Holmes, the very rational, skeptical detective who poo-poos any hint of supernatural in his cases, comes face to face with the supernatural in these tales. Now, there's several in here that look interesting, including one by Kim Newman, a Mycroft and Moran story told from the point of view of Holmes' traditional enemies. But I read 2 in this one. I read The Adventure of Lucifer's Footprints by Christopher Fowler. Christopher Fowler was a horror writer who turned to a detective novelist. He's wrote the Brian and May mysteries, the Peculiar Crimes Unit mysteries, which I will review at some point. I've read almost all of those, and that's a fabulous series. This one was pretty good. It was involving kind of a old crime and a kind of spiritual revenge that Holmes and Watson get involved with. The other one I read was The House of Blood. Now this one was more of a standout for me. This was written by a writer called Tony Richards, and this is the penultimate story in this collection. And this one's fun. This one imagines Holmes long without Watson, because Watson's passed away. Somehow Holmes is immortal. He's not quite sure how. The hint is maybe Moriarty is out there and also immortal, and that's why they both perhaps survived their fall from Reichenbach Falls. But Holmes is now kind of traveling around in the 21st century now, getting involved in cases and assisting the police where he can. He ends up in Las Vegas, and shades of the Night Stalker. He gets involved with not vampires per se, but with a kind of weird cult. And I believe the supernatural force he gets involved with is a kind of a Wendigo. And it's kind of interesting. This force, this kind of cult, is made up of gambling addicts who are losers, and they kind of forming together as this cult that's kind of being fed upon by the spiritual entity. It's really strange and interesting, and it's told from Holmes' point of view, and I liked it quite a bit. That is The House of Blood by Tony Richards. A while ago, I was very pleased and honored to join the Robert E. Howard Foundation YouTube channel. John, who is the one who kind of runs that channel, and he invited me and the aforementioned Jim from Mystery and Mayhem to talk about C.L. Moore and Robert E. Howard's Fiery Redhead Sword Women, Jirel of Joiry by C.L. Moore, and of course Red Sonja and Dark Agnes by Robert E. Howard. And the other guest on that discussion was a writer named Molly Tanzer. Molly was a great guest and full of really good insights and thoughts. She's been approved by the C.L. Moore estate to write new Jirel of Joiry stories. And so for part of this discussion, she allowed, and I believe she was granted access to let us read, proof before it was officially released of issue 3 of the new, the New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine. It's kind of a crowd-funded magazine. It was issue 3, and this was her first of 2 or 3 Jirel stories that she's written, called Jirel and the Mirror of Truth. And we were sent this so we could have that to mention in light of our other conversation points in that discussion. And that was a fun story. Molly's a good writer, and she was smart enough to not try to ape or copy the very kind of rich style that C.L. Moore wrote in, the kind of dense and poetic writing style. Her writing is a little more straightforward, but she captures the spirit of Jirel quite well and gets her involved in a really kind of clever plot where Jirel has been tricked into being kind of the hard charging hand of a wizard, and how she extricates herself from that problem and gets herself and her various captured soldier followers back to Joiry, where they originally came from. It was a clever story, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. And finally, I read 5 stories in this magnificent tome, Worse Things Waiting by one of my favorite all-time writers, Manly Wade Wellman. Now, I'm not going to talk about those stories much here because I just published a video collaboration with Chris from Liminal Spaces and Nick at the Book Graveyard, where we discuss these 5 stories from this book. Now, this book has many, many stories. It's quite a thick tome, Wonderful stuff. Folk tale, folk horror, weird fantasy, supernatural horror stories by Manly Wade Wellman. Almost all but one, I think, that appeared in Weird Tales originally, mostly in the 40s, some in the late 30s. And the one story, The Hairy Thunderer, was published in the magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction in 1960. And that is one of the 5 stories that we discussed in detail on that conversation, that recording, that video that I put out just a few days ago. So please check that out for a very fun and I think interesting discussion. Chris and Nick had lots of great stuff to say about those stories, and we had a lot of fun talking about the great Manly Wade Wellman, who's a very original and skilled fantasist, story writer, but is a little underappreciated and unknown because his books are hard to come by, unfortunately. So we covered 5 stories out of this book, out of this collection, which won the World Fantasy Award in 1975. This collection came out from Carcosa Press in 1973. I've done a video very early on my channel covering this book, and it's making. We also talk about that in this recent discussion. We talked about Frogfather, Sin's Doorway, The Pineys, The Hairy Thunderer, and a novelette, Coven. So all of those were really good stories, really unique and quite varied, I think. And I recommend heartily this conversation that we did recently here. And that will give you more detail about those stories. So that's it for what I read this last month. I believe that's 9 short stories and 7 novels. And again, some of the novels were quite short. That's all I read this past month, more or less. So I will see you guys in the next video. Really appreciate you watching. Sorry if sometimes this goes on a bit too long. Your patience will hopefully be somewhat rewarded. And I'm always very appreciative of anyone watching, liking, subscribing, and leaving comments. Thank you very much. We will see you again in the next video.